Hi, Colin Davis, ShadowTechAlchemy.com. So today I'm going to talk about how we all collectively contribute to the creation of evil in the world. And we do this through our own psychological shadows. And the shadow is a term that comes from Jungian psychology. This is the work of the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung. And this is very well developed and understood, although almost everyone in our society really ignores it and doesn't take it seriously. And if you were to take this seriously, you would see how important this subject is and how far we could go as a species if we were to start taking Jung's understanding seriously. And it's just a shame that it's been sitting on the shelf and a handful of people have been talking about it, but generally the public doesn't really have any understanding of this. So the way this works is first let me define evil. Evil is usually defined as behavior that is far outside of moral or ethical boundaries. And so it occurs on a spectrum. You could say that, stealing something from the store or telling a lie is in the spectrum of evil, but it's on the light side, whereas murder, genocide, these kinds of things are on the heavy side or on the far end of it. And so evil is behavior that breaks moral boundaries. You could also say that there's a subjective feeling to evil, and that you could even say that it's sort of a force that you could feel around certain people, or it's something that kind of gives you chills or whatever. And so I would say there is a subjective kind of a feeling state to cultural information or behavior that is definitely in the spectrum of evil. But generally, when we deal with evil as a society, in our laws, it's basically how you act. It's how you behave. And it's behavior that wrecks society. It's excessively destructive behavior that destroys society, destroys other people, and destroys society. So that's evil. Now, let me say this. Evil is the external correlate to the shadow. The shadow is the source of evil. And this isn't usually said as explicitly as the way I'm saying it right now, either in Jungian psychology or just anywhere, but it's absolutely true. Evil as we know it is sourced in our own psychology in the domain that Carl Jung called the shadow. So the shadow is basically anything in our unconscious mind that is so dark, it's so dark or antithetical to our conscious mind, to our beliefs about ourselves, that we shove it down into the unconscious. We repress it into the unconscious, right? So if you see yourself as a good person, as a compassionate person, and a loving person, well, you may have impulses and drives that would lead you to some pretty ugly behavior, but you can't handle that. That doesn't fit with how you feel that you should be or how that you are, and so you shove it down. And so it's held in cognitive dissonance in the unconscious. And the shadow really, in the most general way of looking at it, it can contain any kind of drives, any kind of material, any kind of energies, impulses, feelings, thoughts, images, any kind of unconscious or any kind of psychic material, I should say, that you can't handle about yourself. So that could also be good stuff. That could be talents that you really just can't really, that maybe your family didn't really, they didn't really see your genius and your talents. And so maybe you kind of are still holding those things back. And you're having a hard time really seeing how you could be as great as you really could be. And so that's what the Jungians call the golden shadow. And so there's potential genius that's down there too, but it's typically thought of as the dark material, the dark primal material. So this is everything that comes to us through our animal heritage, right? This is all the drives and the behaviors, the energies that animals have that if we were to act on, that would wreck our society. But we have these sort of primal and reptilian drives and tendencies in us. They're in our genetics, and they're there, and they're back there. They're pushing on us. So those are in the shadow. Also, what's in the shadow is, just the personal leftovers of all the kind of things that we had to disown in our childhood just because of the way we were raised, because of our families, whether it's, some families are going to be very strict, religious families are going to be strict in certain ways. And so there might be sexuality, or there might be other kinds of behaviors and stuff that your family did not want you to express, and so you didn't express them. So those are back there. There could be leftover of wounds. You could have had a difficult childhood. There could have been abuse, or people could have died in the family, and you could have all kinds of grief left over. So there can be shame in the shadow. There can be grief. There can be fear. There can be rage. Rage is a big one. All these are big ones, actually, which is basically the same thing as saying aggression. And there's narcissistic drives, needs, infantile needs to be seen. Those are in there, and all kinds of darker material that you don't really want to deal with, and you don't want to admit that you have inside of you. This is the shadow, and we all have a shadow. And the more organized and clean and moral a society is, then the more it has to shove back this shadow material. And so this is just part of us, and it's just part of it's part of our makeup, and it's a consequence of our advancement out of the animal kingdom, and it's something that we really we have not evolved to the place to where this material has a clean way of being processed and being worked through the psyche. So what the psyche has evolved so far to be able to do with this dark material that we all have is that it first of all, it represses it. And in depth psychology, there's actually two levels of this. There's first suppression, where you know that you have some of these dark tendencies, you have this sexuality, you have this aggression, whatever it is, but you hold it back, and you just try not to deal with it, and you just distract yourself, and you just kind of, keep it back. But then there's repression, and repression is where this dark material is so antithetical to your mind, to your conscious mind, that you can't deal with it at all. And so it just stays way back there. It's in the shadow. So that's the first thing that the psyche does, is it just pushes it back, and it builds up there. These things build up. And as you get older, it builds up more and more if you don't work with your shadow material. But so we suppress and we repress, and then we do this simple kind of knee-jerk kind of strategy or mechanism where it's called projection. And people are starting to use the word projection again these days. And so what we do is we do this unconsciously. This is like I said, knee jerk. This is just an unconscious kind of a mechanism. And what we do is we may have, let's say we have some narcissism or some grandiosity, right, in our shadows, and it's back there. And then we see somebody else in the world that's acting narcissistic or grandiose, and they trigger us, right? We go, oh man, that person that is such a narcissist. That person is so arrogant and blah, 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 and this, that, and the other. And we really can't stand that other person, and they really trigger us. Well, the reason why that's happening is because we have those traits inside of our own shadows, right? But we don't know it consciously. They're back there. And we haven't developed to the point to where we can handle, dealing with that aspect of ourselves. So we project it onto other people. They might have some of these traits. They might have that grandiosity, that arrogance or whatever. There might be some there. But the reason why we're triggered is because it's resonating with the stuff that's in our own shadows. So that's the first thing we do is we project. After we repress, then we project. And then once we project onto that other person, we can actually get together with other people. And we can all agree on, those people are bad. Those people are evil in this way or the other. And then we can get together and then we can do protests, or we can go to war with each other, and maybe somebody will, somebody will fall unconscious enough to assassinate somebody. And then everybody in the group will get a cathartic release out of that, right? So first we project and then we displace. We displace the energy. And we also displace it through all kinds of ways. Just every way imaginable that we allow some of this shadow energy, some of our own internal evil, to leak out into the world. And we drive aggressively on the highway, or we yell at somebody at the grocery store, or we do something kind of shady, the term shady. And we allow our evil to get displaced into the world in all kinds of little small ways. There's also what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil, where we just kind of go along to get along, they say. And so we know, maybe we work for a company or we work for the government, and we know that there's something shady going on, something evil is happening, but everybody's allowing it to happen by not stepping up. And so collectively, we all together kind of create evil just by not taking action when we should. So this is what we do with our own shadow material. We repress, we suppress and repress, and then we project, and then we displace, and we sometimes, or all the time actually, do it in groups. And when we do it in groups, we call that kind of projection, we call that demonization or scapegoating. And so we demonize and scapegoat entire groups, and then that gives us the excuse as to why we can go slaughter them or whatever it is. So this is the simple way, very simple, very primitive way that we as human beings deal with the fact that our conscious egos by default create a shadow reservoir. By having a moral conscious mind and creating a collective moral society, we naturally have to throw into the closet, we have to sweep under the rug our natural darkness, and then that has to come back out some other way. And so that's what's going on. It's just energy flow. That's all it really is. This is just physics. This is the movement of energy. And so the last thing, or maybe not the last thing, we'll see how far I go with this. I feel like I'm getting towards the end of this, but if you want to know how this kind of works collectively at the energetic level, just consider Dr. Dan Siegel's definition of the mind. The mind and the psyche, they're the same thing for our purposes. His definition of the mind is the mind is an embodied and relational field of energy and information. It's an embodied and relational field of energy and information. So if you want to know how the shadow moves throughout humanity and how we all contribute to it, is because the psyche is relational. This is how you can get around other people and you can feel their energy, and energy, emotional and all kinds of psychic energy can flow from person to person, and we all know about that. But then you can also do it through culture. You can do it through information. You can do it through the internet. You can do it through writing books. You can do it through speaking, language, philosophy, politics, art. This is all culture. Our language and our communications. We also transmit psychological energy and information to each other that way. And the shadow finds its way into our culture. We call these, well, there's all kinds of ways that we do this, but one way that's common is through destructive ideologies, right? And so, for example, you might have the ideology of communism, right? So on the surface, communism is just an ethic about taking care of other people and about people sharing and being communal and fairness and equality, and that's what's the light side. But then the dark side, the shadow side of that ideology is when people don't go along with the ideology, well, then you have to force them into the ideology. And that's where you get to move all of your shadow energy, your aggression, and all of your murderous tendencies that are inside of all of us. You get to use that and to force the world into your communist state. So you want to have a utopia, but you're going to have to create a hell in order to get the utopia. Makes no sense at all, but it is a way of moving collective shadow energy. So that way, through the movement of energy and information through the collective, that's how the shadow gets transmitted through all of us. And there's all kinds of metaphysical ways that we could explain this, but I tend to want to just keep it at a level that we can all prove and we all know is true. So that's how we do it. And so now, once you know this, okay, I see how that works. It's like a circuit. It's an energy system. I see the how that works. I've pretty much just explained to you the basic theory of the shadow, the personal and collective shadow, and how it works. And then you go, okay, well then what do we do about it? Well, we don't have a complete answer to it yet because we have a lot of our shadow energy is coming from our ancient genetics. And so we don't really have a way to deal with that yet. At the epigenetic level, right, where trauma and the leftovers of trauma are passed from family to family, well, then you can talk about parenting, and you can talk about conscious parenting, and you can talk about doing shadow work and teaching it to other people and this kind of a thing. So we can make a lot of progress there. We can't quite get over completely. We don't have the technology or the sophisticated, or we don't have the ability yet as human beings to rewire the natural evil out of us. Maybe someday we can. Maybe someday we will be another. Maybe the species will evolve to a higher level like that. But right now we can mitigate it. That's what we can do right now. We can mitigate the amount of evil that we create in the world and the amount of shadow energy that is wrecking ourselves and our own lives. Because the shadow doesn't just go out, it also wrecks us internally. Some people, just their personality type makes it so that they will project it out. They're more exoteric with it. It becomes behavior. But other people, they internalize it more, and so the more they hold on to their shadow material and they don't work on it, then they get sick, right? Everybody has all kinds of genetic propensities for diseases, or what they call syndromes now. And so you sit on this shadow material, it just grows, it festers. This is psychic energy in the body. And then it leads to all kinds of illnesses, and this is a big part of all of our health crisis that we're in. And then it also leads people to want to self-medicate through food, through drugs, through alcohol, or whatever. They find all kinds of ways to self-medicate, to pacify themselves. And so, yeah, this is where we're at. So the next step is to become aware that you have a shadow. You don't know everything that's in it, and it's kind of your job to start to go in there and to slowly start to pull out all the stuff that's in there. Pull out the rage, pull out the grief, pull out the jealousy, pull out the infantile grandiosity, the narcissism, pull out this stuff. Start looking at it. Start getting it into your conscious mind. Start going, oh, okay, I am those things. Those things I hated about Donald Trump or about this or that other person or whatever, I have those tendencies in myself. Oh, okay. And start to come to terms with those, right? And then start to process the emotional energy behind that. So I talk a lot about this process I call emotional processing, but it comes from John Ruskin's system, emotional clearing. And Melissa Mari and I, we did a lot of this over the 12 years that we worked together. And this is very, very helpful. And you can find that described in my books. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but my last book I give away for free at shadowtechalchemy.com. And this emotional processing method is in there, and many other shadow work practices are in there. So you can just go grab that. But so that's what we do. We do shadow work on ourselves, and we start to clear this junk out, and it works. It's a lifestyle, though, like anything with health. And it's a lifestyle. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that I don't know how far we can go, in my lifetime with this. This is sort of part of my job, my task, my mission, is partially to really demystify the shadow in evil and to explain it to people and give people understandings and shadow work methods to clean themselves up internally. But yeah, so I have this book here, and I know I'm kind of talking fast through the whole thing, but I hope you can keep up. But so this is called Depth Psychology and a New Ethic, and it's by Eric Neumann, and he's one of Jung's colleagues and students. And it is very difficult language. It's translated, and it's language from the 40s. Sort of scientific, psychological language, originally written in German and then translated, and it uses a lot of Jungian concepts, so it's probably not that accessible. But in this book, you can just grab it anyway, and in this book, he basically describes how what he calls the old ethic is civilization as we have it right now. We're not aware of our shadow material. We dump it into the world. It collectivizes. We demonize people. We create wars. And we displace our shadow through all kinds of unconscious behavior. And then there's the new ethic where we consciously take an accounting of our shadow material. We admit that we have this stuff and we start working with it, and we do what Jung called individuation, which is his term for inner development work. And we work on ourselves, and we create an ethic, a lifestyle out of working on ourselves, out of coming into contact with our shadow material, bringing it into our own consciousness, bringing it into our relationships, bringing it into our conversations, and bringing it into our society. And so that's the new ethic. And we are really at the... he said that in 1945, after World War II. They had this whole thing of the shadow figured out back then. And we really, it's been sitting on the shelf. There's been a handful of people that have really worked with it. I think Robert L. Moore is one Jungian who I think worked with this concept of the shadow from the Jungian perspective, and really, he developed it further and advanced it. And there are other people. There's Paul Levy, he's out there, and but from the Jungian perspective, there's not that many people. And I think this is the most useful, the most scientifically grounded system for understanding how evil is created and how we can heal ourselves through integrating our own shadows. So that's that for now, and I will talk to you later.